Kenya, officially the Republic of Kenya, is a country in East Africa. With a population of more than 47.6 million in the 2019 census, Kenya is the 28th most populous country in the world and 7th most populous in Africa. Kenya's capital and largest city is Nairobi, while its oldest and second largest city is the major port city of Mombasa, situated on Mombasa Island in the Indian Ocean and the surrounding mainland. Mombasa was the capital of the British East Africa Protectorate, which included most of what is now Kenya and southwestern Somalia, from 1889 to 1907. Other important cities include Kisumu and Nakuru. Kenya is bordered by South Sudan to the northwest, Ethiopia to the north, Somalia to the east, Uganda to the west, Tanzania to the south, and the Indian Ocean to the southeast. Kenya's geography, climate, and population vary widely, ranging from cold snow-capped mountaintops with vast surrounding forests, wildlife, and fertile agricultural regions to temperate climates in western and Rift Valley counties and further on to dry, less fertile arid and semi-arid areas and absolute deserts. Kenya's earliest inhabitants were hunter-gatherers, like the present-day Hadza people. According to archaeological dating of associated artifacts and skeletal material, Cushitic speakers first settled in Kenya's lowlands between 3200 and 1300 BC, a phase known as the lowland savanna pastoral Neolithic. Nilotic-speaking pastoralists began migrating from present-day South Sudan into Kenya around 500 BC. 15 Bantu people settled at the coast and the interior between 250 BC and 500 AD. European contact began in 1500 AD with the Portuguese Empire, and effective colonization of Kenya began in the 19th century during the European exploration of the interior. Modern-day Kenya emerged from a protectorate established by the British Empire in 1895 and the subsequent Kenya colony, which began in 1920. Numerous disputes between the UK and the colony led to the Mau Mau Revolution, which began in 1952, and the Declaration of Independence in 1963. After independence, Kenya remained a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. The current constitution was adopted in 2010 and replaced the 1963 Independence Constitution. Kenya is a presidential representative democratic republic, in which elected officials represent the people and the president is the head of state and government. Kenya is a member of the United Nations, the Commonwealth, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, CUMSA, International Criminal Court, as well as other international organizations. With a GNI of 1,840, Kenya is a lower middle-income economy. Kenya's economy is the second largest in Eastern and Central Africa, after Ethiopia, with Nairobi serving as a major regional commercial hub. Agriculture is the largest sector. Tea and coffee are traditional cash crops, while fresh flowers are a fast-growing export. The service industry is also a major economic driver, particularly tourism. Kenya is a member of the East African Community Trade Bloc, though some international trade organizations categorize it as part of the Greater Horn of Africa. Africa is Kenya's largest export market, followed by the European Union. History. Human prehistory. Hominids such as Homo habilis 1.8 to 2.5 million years ago and Homo erectus 1.9 million to 350,000 years ago are possible direct ancestors of modern Homo sapiens, and lived in Kenya in the Pleistocene epoch. During excavations at Lake Turkana in 1984, paleoanthropologist Richard Leakey, assisted by Kamoya Kimu, discovered the Turkana boy, a 1.6-million-year-old Homo erectus fossil. East Africa, including Kenya, is one of the earliest regions where modern humans are believed to have lived. Evidence was found in 2018, dating to about 320,000 years ago, of the early emergence of modern behaviors, including long-distance trade networks involving goods such as obsidian, the use of pigments, and the possible making of projectile points. The authors of 2018 studies on the site suggest that complex and modern behaviors had already begun in Africa around the time of the emergence of Homo sapiens. Neolithic. The first inhabitants of present-day Kenya were hunter-gatherer groups, akin to the modern Khoisan speakers. These people were later largely replaced by agro-pastoral Cushitic from the Horn of Africa. 35 During the early Holocene, the regional climate shifted from dry to wetter conditions, providing an opportunity for the development of cultural traditions such as agriculture and herding, in a more favorable environment. Around 500 BC, Nilotic-speaking pastoralists started migrating from present-day southern Sudan into Kenya. Nilotic groups in Kenya include the Kalenjin, Samburu, Luo, Turkana, and Maasai. By the first millennium AD, Bantu-speaking farmers had moved into the region, initially along the coast. The Bantus originated in West Africa along the Binya River in what is now eastern Nigeria and western Cameroon. The Bantu migration brought new developments in agriculture and iron working to the region. Bantu groups in Kenya include the Kikuyu, Luhya, Kamba, Kisii, Meru, Kuria, Embu, Ambir, Wetawetawatuwata, Wapakomo, and Majikenda, among others. Notable prehistoric sites in the interior of Kenya include the site Namoretunga on the west side of Lake Turkana and the walled settlement of Thimlichohinga in Migori County. Swahili trade period. The Kenyan coast had served as host to communities of iron workers and Bantu subsistence farmers, hunters, and fishers who supported the economy with agriculture, fishing, metal production, and trade with foreign countries. These communities formed the earliest city-states in the region, which were collectively known as Azania. By the 1st century CE, many of the city-states such as Mombasa, Malindi, and Zanzibar began to establish trading relations with Arabs. This led to the increased economic growth of the Swahili states, the introduction of Islam, Arabic influences on the Swahili Bantu language, cultural diffusion, as well as the Swahili city-states becoming members of a larger trade network. Many historians had long believed that the city-states were established by Arab or Persian traders, but archaeological evidence has led scholars to recognize the city-states as an indigenous development which, though subjected to foreign influence due to trade, retained a Bantu cultural core. DNA evidence has found that the Swahili people were of mixed African and Asian ancestry. The Kilwe Sultanate was a medieval sultanate centered at Kilwe, in modern-day Tanzania. At its height, its authority stretched over the entire length of the Swahili coast, including Kenya. Since the 10th century, rulers of Kilwe would go on to build elaborate coral mosques and introduce copper coinage. Swahili, a Bantu language with Arabic, Persian, and other Middle Eastern and South Asian loanwords, later developed as a lingua franca for trade between the different peoples. Since the turn of the 20th century, Swahili has adopted numerous loanwords and calques from English, many of them originating during English colonial rule. Early Portuguese colonization. The Swahili built Mombasa into a major port city and established trade links with other nearby city-states, as well as commercial centers in Persia, Arabia, and even India. By the 15th century, Portuguese voyager Duarte Barbosa claimed that Mombasa is a place of great traffic and has a good harbor in which there are always moored small craft of many kinds and also great ships, both of which are bound from Sofala and others which come from Cambay and Melinde and others which sail to the island of Zanzibar. In the 17th century, the Swahili coast was conquered and came under the direct rule of the Omani Arabs, who expanded the slave trade to meet the demands of plantations in Oman and Zanzibar. Initially, these traders came mainly from Oman, but later many came from Zanzibar. In addition, the Portuguese started buying slaves from the Omani and Zanzibari traders in response to the interruption of the transatlantic slave trade by British abolitionists. Throughout the centuries, the Kenyan coast has played host to many merchants and explorers. Among the cities that line the Kenyan coast is Malindi. It has remained an important Swahili settlement since the 14th century and once rivaled Mombasa for dominance in the African Great Lakes region. Malindi has traditionally been a friendly port city for foreign powers. In 1414, the Chinese trader and explorer Zheng He, representing the Ming dynasty, visited the East African coast on one of his last treasure voyages. Malindi authorities also welcomed the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama in 1498. 18th and 19th centuries. During the 18th and 19th century CE, the Maasai people moved into what is now modern-day central Kenya, from a region north of Lake Rudolph. Although there were not many, they managed to conquer a great amount of Bantu-speaking peoples, who did not put up much resistance. The Nandi peoples managed to oppose the Maasai, while the Tavta peoples fled to the forests on the eastern edge of Mount Kilimanjaro, along with the Kikuyu peoples, although they later were forced to leave the land due to the threat of smallpox. An outbreak of either rinderpest or pleuropneumonia greatly affected the Maasai's cattle, while an epidemic of smallpox affected the Maasai themselves. After the death of the Maasai Mbasian, the chief Laban, the Maasai split into warring factions. There was much strife between the Nilotic and Bantu peoples, however, cooperation between such groups as the Luo people, Luia people, and Gasai people is evinced by shared vocabulary for modern implements and similar economic regimes. Although Arab traders remained in the area, trade routes were disrupted by the hostile Maasai, though there was trade in ivory between these factions. The first foreigners to successfully get past the Maasai were Johann Ludwig Krapf and Johannes Riebmann, two German missionaries who established a mission in Rabai, not too far from Mombasa. The pair were the first Europeans to sight Mount Kenya. German Protectorate 1885 to 1890. The colonial history of Kenya dates from the establishment of a German Empire Protectorate over the Sultan of Zanzibar's coastal possessions in 1885, followed by the arrival of the Imperial British East Africa Company in 1888. Imperial rivalry was prevented by the Heligoland, Zanzibar Treaty. Germany handed its East African coastal holdings to Britain in 1890. British Kenya 1888 to 1962. The building of the railway was resisted by some ethnic groups, but the British eventually built it. The Nandi were the first ethnic group to be put in a native reserve to stop them from disrupting the building of the railway. During the railway construction era, there was a significant influx of Indian workers, who provided the bulk of the skilled manpower required for construction. They and most of their descendants later remained in Kenya and formed the core of several distinct Indian communities, such as the Ismaili Muslim and Sikh communities. While building the railway through Tsavo, a number of the Indian railway workers and local African laborers were attacked by two lions known as the Tsavo man-eaters. At the outbreak of World War I in August 1914, the governors of British East Africa, as the Protectorate was generally known, and German East Africa initially agreed on a truce in an attempt to keep the young colonies out of direct hostilities. But Lieutenant Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, the German military commander, determined to tie down as many British resources as possible. Completely cut off from Germany, Lettow-Vorbeck conducted an effective guerrilla warfare campaign, living off the land, capturing British supplies, and remaining undefeated. He eventually surrendered in northern Rhodesia 14 days after the armistice was signed in 1918. To chase von Leto, the British deployed the British Indian Army troops from India but needed large numbers of porters to overcome the formidable logistics of transporting supplies far into the interior on foot. The Carrier Corps was formed and ultimately mobilized over 400,000 Africans, contributing to their long-term politicization. In 1920, the East Africa Protectorate was turned into a colony and renamed Kenya after its highest mountain. During the early part of the 20th century, the interior Central Highlands were settled by British and other European farmers, who became wealthy farming coffee and tea. One depiction of this period of change from a colonist's perspective is found in the memoir Out of Africa by Danish author Baroness Karen von Blixen-Fineck, published in 1937. By the 1930s, approximately 30,000 white settlers lived in the area and gained a political voice because of their contribution to the market economy. The Central Highlands were already home to over 1 million members of the Kikuyu people, most of whom had no land claims in European terms and lived as itinerant farmers. To protect their interests, the settlers banned the growing of coffee and introduced a hut tax, and the landless were granted less and less land in exchange for their labor. A massive exodus to the cities ensued as their ability to make a living from the land dwindled. By the 1950s, there were 80,000 white settlers living in Kenya. Throughout World War II, Kenya was an important source of manpower and agriculture for the United Kingdom. Kenya itself was the site of fighting between Allied forces and Italian troops in 1940–41, when Italian forces invaded. Wajir and Malindi were bombed as well. Mau Mau Uprising. From October 1952 to December 1959, Kenya was in a state of emergency arising from the Mau Mau rebellion against British rule. The Mau Mau, also known as the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, were primarily Kikuyu people. During the colonial administration's crackdown, over 11,000 rebel fighters had been killed, along with 100 British troops and 2,000 Kenyan loyalist soldiers. War crimes were committed on both sides of the conflict, including the publicized Lari massacre and the Ola massacre. The governor requested and obtained British and African troops, including the King's African Rifles. The British began counterinsurgency operations. In May 1953, General Sir George Erskine took charge as Commander-in-Chief of the colony's armed forces, with the personal backing of Winston Churchill. The capture of Wera Hiwaitat on January 15, 1954 and the subsequent interrogation led to a better understanding of the Mau Mau command structure for the British. Operation Anvil opened on April 24, 1954, after weeks of planning by the Army with the approval of the War Council. The operation effectively placed Nairobi under military siege. Nairobi's occupants were screened and suspected Mau Mau supporters moved to detention camps. More than 80,000 Kikuyu were held in detention camps without trial, often subject to brutal treatment. The Home Guard formed the core of the government's strategy as it was composed of loyalist Africans, not foreign forces such as the British Army and King's African Rifles. The capture of Dedan Kimathi on October 21, 1956 in Nyeri signified the ultimate defeat of the Mau Mau and essentially ended the military offensive. During this period, substantial governmental changes to land tenure occurred. The most important of these was the Swinerton Plan, which was used to both reward loyalists and punish Mau Mau. This left roughly one-third of Kikuyu bereft of any tenancy land arrangement and thus propertyless at the time of independence. Somalis of Kenya referendum, 1962. Before Kenya got its independence, Somali ethnic people in present-day Kenya in the areas of northern frontier districts petitioned Her Majesty's government not to be included in Kenya. The colonial government decided to hold Kenya's first referendum in 1962 to check the willingness of Somalis in Kenya to join Somalia. The result of the referendum showed that 86% of Somalis in Kenya wanted to join Somalia, but the British colonial administration rejected the result and the Somalis remained in Kenya. Independence. The first direct elections for native Kenyans to the Legislative Council took place in 1957. Despite British hopes of handing power to moderate local rivals, it was the Kenya African National Union of Jomo Kenyatta that formed a government. The colony of Kenya and the Protectorate of Kenya each came to an end on December 12, 1963, with independence conferred on all of Kenya. The UK ceded sovereignty over the colony of Kenya. The Sultan of Zanzibar agreed that simultaneous with independence for the colony, he would cease to have sovereignty over the Protectorate of Kenya so that all of Kenya would become one sovereign state. In this way, Kenya became an independent country under the Kenya Independence Act 1963 of the United Kingdom. On December 12, 1964, Kenya became a republic under the name Republic of Kenya. Concurrently, the Kenyan army fought the Shifta War against ethnic Somali rebels inhabiting the northern frontier district who wanted to join their kin in the Somali Republic to the north. A ceasefire was eventually reached with the signing of the Arusha Memorandum in October 1967, but relative insecurity prevailed through 1969. To discourage further invasions, Kenya signed a defense pact with Ethiopia in 1969, which is still in effect. First Presidency. On December 12, 1964, the Republic of Kenya was proclaimed, and Jomo Kenyatta became Kenya's first president. Under Kenyatta, corruption became widespread throughout the government, civil service, and business community. Kenyatta and his family were tied up with this corruption as they enriched themselves through the mass purchase of property after 1963. Their acquisitions in the Central, Rift Valley, and Coast provinces aroused great anger among landless Kenyans. His family used his presidential position to circumvent legal or administrative obstacles to acquiring property. The Kenyatta family also heavily invested in the coastal hotel business, with Kenyatta personally owning the Leonard Beach Hotel. Kenyatta's mixed legacy was highlighted at the 10-year anniversary of Kenya's independence. A December 1973 article in the New York Times praised Kenyatta's leadership and Kenya for emerging as a model of pragmatism and conservatism. Kenya's GDP had increased at an annual rate of 7%, higher than the population growth rate of more than 3%. But Amnesty International responded to the article by stating the cost of the stability in terms of human rights abuses. The opposition party started by Oginga Odinga was banned in 1969 after the Kisumu massacre, and KPU leaders were still in detention without trial in gross violation of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The Kenya Students' Union, Jehovah's Witnesses, and all opposition parties were outlawed. Kenyatta ruled until his death on August 22, 1978. Moi era. After Kenyatta died, Daniel Arap Moi became president. He retained the presidency, running unopposed in elections held in 1979, 1983, and 1988, all of which were held under the single-party constitution. The 1983 elections were held a year early, and were a direct result of a failed military coup on August 2, 1982. The 1982 coup was masterminded by a low-ranking Air Force serviceman, Senior Private Hezekiah Akuka, and was staged mainly by enlisted men of the Air Force. It was quickly suppressed by forces commanded by Chief of General Staff Mohammed Mohammed, a veteran Somali military official. They included the General Service Unit and later the regular police. On the heels of the Garissa massacre of 1980, Kenyan troops committed the Wagala massacre in 1984 against thousands of civilians in Wajir County. An official probe into the atrocities was later ordered in 2011. The election held in 1988 saw the advent of the Mlolongo system, where voters were supposed to line up behind their favored candidates instead of casting a secret ballot. This was seen as the climax of a very undemocratic regime and led to widespread agitation for constitutional reform. Several contentious clauses, including the one that allowed for only one political party, were changed in the following years. Transition to multi-party democracy. In 1991, Kenya transitioned to a multi-party political system after 26 years of single-party rule. On October 28, 1992, Moi dissolved parliament, 5 months before the end of his term. As a result, preparations began for all elective seats in parliament as well as the president. The election was scheduled to take place on December 7, 1992, but delays led to its postponement to December 29. Apart from KANU, the ruling party, other parties represented in the elections included Ford Kenya and Ford Asili. This election was marked by large-scale intimidation of opponents and harassment of election officials. It resulted in an economic crisis propagated by ethnic violence as the president was accused of rigging electoral results to retain power. This election was a turning point for Kenya as it signified the beginning of the end of Moi's leadership and the rule of KANU. Moi retained the presidency and George Setatai became vice president. Although it held on to power, KANU won 100 seats and lost 88 seats to the 6 opposition parties. The 1992 elections marked the beginning of multi-party politics after more than 25 years of KANU rule. Following skirmishes in the aftermath of the elections, 5,000 people were killed and another 75,000 displaced from their homes. In the next 5 years, many political alliances were formed in preparation for the next elections. In 1994, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga died and several coalitions joined his Ford Kenya party to form a new party, United National Democratic Alliance. This party was plagued with disagreements. In 1995, Richard Leakey formed the Safina party, but it was denied registration until November 1997. In 1996, KANU revised the constitution to allow Moi to remain president for another term. Subsequently, Moi stood for re-election and won a 5th term in 1997. His win was strongly criticized by his major opponents, Kibaki and Odinga, as fraudulent. Following this win, Moi was constitutionally barred from another presidential term. Beginning in 1998, he attempted to influence the country's succession politics to have Uhuru Kenyatta elected in the 2002 elections. President Kibaki and the road to a new constitution. Moi's plan to be replaced by Uhuru Kenyatta failed, and Mwai Kibaki, running for the opposition coalition, was elected president. David Anderson reports the elections were judged free and fair by local and international observers, and seemed to mark a turning point in Kenya's democratic evolution. In 2005, Kenyans rejected a plan to replace the 1963 Independence Constitution with a new one. As a result, the elections of 2007 took place following the procedure set by the old constitution. Kibaki was re-elected in highly contested elections marred by political and ethnic violence. The main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, claimed the election was rigged and that he was the rightfully elected president. In the ensuing violence, 1,500 people were killed and another 600,000 internally displaced, making it the worst post-election violence in Kenya. To stop the death and displacement of people, Kibaki and Odinga agreed to work together, with the latter taking the position of a prime minister. This made Odinga the second prime minister of Kenya. In July 2010, Kenya partnered with other East African countries to form the new East African Common Market within the East African Community. In 2011, Kenya began sending troops to Somalia to fight the terror group Al-Shabaab. In mid-2011, 2 consecutive missed rainy seasons precipitated the worst drought in East Africa in 60 years. The northwestern Turkana region was especially affected, with local schools shut down as a result. The crisis was reportedly over by early 2012 because of coordinated relief efforts. Aid agencies subsequently shifted their emphasis to recovery initiatives, including digging irrigation canals and distributing plant seeds. In August 2010, Kenyans held a referendum and passed a new constitution, which limited presidential powers and devolved the central government. Following the passage of the new constitution, Kenya became a presidential representative democratic republic, whereby the President of Kenya is both head of state and head of government, and of a multi-party system. The new constitution also states that executive powers are exercised by the executive branch of government, headed by the President, who chairs a cabinet composed of people chosen from outside Parliament. Legislative power is vested exclusively in Parliament. The judiciary is independent of the executive and the legislature. Kenyatta presidency. After Kibaki's tenure ended in 2013, Kenya held its first general elections after the 2010 constitution had been passed. Uhuru Kenyatta won in a disputed election result, leading to a petition by the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. The Supreme Court upheld the election results and Kenyatta began his term with William Ruto as deputy president. Despite this ruling, the Supreme Court and the head of the Supreme Court were seen as powerful institutions that could check the powers of the president. In 2017, Kenyatta won a second term in office in another disputed election. Odinga again petitioned the results in the Supreme Court, accusing the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission of mismanagement of the elections and Kenyatta and his party of rigging. The Supreme Court overturned the election results in what became a landmark ruling in Africa and one of the very few in the world in which the results of a presidential elections were annulled. This ruling solidified the position of the Supreme Court as an independent body. Consequently, Kenya had a second round of elections for the presidential position, in which Kenyatta emerged the winner after Odinga refused to participate, citing irregularities. In March 2018, a historic handshake between Kenyatta and his longtime opponent Odinga signaled a period of reconciliation followed by economic growth and increased stability. Between 2019 and 2021, Kenyatta and Odinga combined efforts to promote major changes to the Kenyan constitution, labeled the Building Bridges Initiative, saying that their efforts were to improve inclusion and overcome the country's winner-take-all election system that often resulted in post-election violence. The BBI proposal called for broad expansion of the legislative and executive branches, including the creation of a prime minister with 2 deputies and an official leader of the opposition, reverting to selecting cabinet ministers from among the elected members of parliament, establishment of up to 70 new constituencies, and addition of up to 300 unelected members of parliament. Critics saw this as an unnecessary attempt to reward political dynasties and blunt the efforts of Deputy President William Ruto and bloat the government at an exceptional cost to the debt-laden country. Ultimately, in May 2021, the Kenyan High Court ruled that the BBI constitutional reform effort was unconstitutional, because it was not truly a popular initiative, but rather an effort of the government. The court sharply criticized Kenyatta for the attempt, laying out grounds for his being sued, personally, or even impeached. The ruling was seen as a major defeat for both Kenyatta and Odinga, but a boon to Odinga's future presidential election rival, Ruto. On August 20, 2021, Kenya's Court of Appeal again upheld the High Court judgment of May 2021, which was appealed by the BBI Secretariat. Ruto presidency. In August 2022, Deputy President William Ruto narrowly won the presidential election. He took 50% of the vote. His main rival, Raila Odinga, got 49% of the vote. On September 13, 2022, William Ruto was sworn in as Kenya's fifth president. Government and politics. Kenya is a presidential representative democratic republic with a multi-party system. The president is both the head of state and head of government. Executive power is exercised by the government. Legislative power is vested in both the government and the National Assembly and the Senate. The judiciary is independent of the executive and the legislature. There has been growing concern, especially during former President Daniel Arap Moi's tenure, that the executive was increasingly meddling with the affairs of the judiciary. Kenya has high levels of corruption according to Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, a metric which attempts to gauge the prevalence of public sector corruption in various countries. In 2019, the nation placed 137th out of 180 countries in the index, with a score of 28 out of 100. But there are several rather significant developments with regard to curbing corruption from the Kenyan government, for instance the establishment of a new and independent Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Following general elections held in 1997, the Constitution of Kenya Review Act, designed to pave the way for more comprehensive amendments to the Kenyan Constitution, was passed by the National Parliament. In December 2002, Kenya held democratic and open elections, which were judged free and fair by most international observers. The 2002 elections marked an important turning point in Kenya's democratic evolution in that power was transferred peacefully from the Kenya African National Union, which had ruled the country since independence, to the National Rainbow Coalition, a coalition of political parties. Under the presidency of Mwai Kibaki, the new ruling coalition promised to focus its efforts on generating economic growth, combating corruption, improving education, and rewriting its constitution. A few of these promises have been met. There is free primary education. In 2007, the government issued a statement declaring that from 2008, secondary education would be heavily subsidized, with the government footing all tuition fees. 2013 elections and new government. Under the new constitution and with President Kibaki prohibited by term limits from running for a third term, Deputy Prime Minister Uhuru Kenyatta ran for office. He won with 51% of the vote in March 2013. In December 2014, President Kenyatta signed a Security Laws Amendment Bill, which supporters of the law suggested was necessary to guard against armed groups. Opposition politicians, human rights groups, and 9 Western countries criticized the security bill, arguing that it infringed on democratic freedoms. The governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France also collectively issued a press statement cautioning about the law's potential impact. Through the Jubilee Coalition, the bill was later passed on December 19 in the National Assembly under acrimonious circumstances. Foreign relations. Kenya has close ties with its fellow Swahili-speaking neighbors in the African Great Lakes region. Relations with Uganda and Tanzania are generally strong, as the three nations work toward economic and social integration through common membership in the East African Community. Relations with Somalia have historically been tense, although there has been some military coordination against Islamist insurgents. Kenya has good relations with the United Kingdom. Kenya is one of the most pro-American nations in Africa, and the wider world. With International Criminal Court trial dates scheduled in 2013 for both President Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto related to the 2007 election aftermath, US President Barack Obama, who is half Kenyan, chose not to visit the country during his mid-2013 African trip. Later in the summer, Kenyatta visited China at the invitation of President Xi Jinping after a stop in Russia and not having visited the United States as president. In July 2015, Obama visited Kenya, the first American president to visit the country while in office. The British Army Training Unit Kenya is used for the training of British infantry battalions in the arid and rugged terrain of the Great Rift Valley. Economy. Kenya's macroeconomic outlook has steadily posted robust growth over the past few decades, mostly from road, rail, air, and water transport infrastructure projects, as well as massive investments in information and communication technology. The Kenyan economy is the largest in East Africa. After independence, Kenya promoted rapid economic growth through public investment, encouraged smallholder agricultural production and provided incentives for private industrial investment. Kenya is East Africa's regional transportation and financial hub. Kenya's financial sector is vibrant, well-developed and diversified, boasting the highest financial inclusion in the region and globally. Foreign investments in Kenya remain relatively weak considering the size of its economy and its level of development. As of 2022, Kenya's total FDI stock stood at US $10.4 billion, accounting for a mere 9% of the country's GDP. In 2017, Kenya ranked 92nd in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, rising from 113 RD in 2016 of 190 countries. The important agricultural sector is one of the least developed and largely inefficient, employing 75% of the workforce compared to less than 3% in the food-secure developed countries. Kenya is usually classified as a frontier market or occasionally an emerging market, but it is not one of the least developed countries. The economy has seen much expansion, seen by strong performance in tourism, higher education, and telecommunications, and decent post-drought results in agriculture, especially the vital tea sector. Kenya's economy grew by more than 7% in 2007, and its foreign debt was greatly reduced. This changed immediately after the disputed presidential election of December 2007, following the chaos which engulfed the country. Telecommunications and financial activity over the last decade now comprise 62% of GDP. 22% of GDP still comes from the unreliable agricultural sector, which employs 75% of the labor force. A small portion of the population relies on food aid. Industry and manufacturing is the smallest sector, accounting for 16% of GDP. The service, industry, and manufacturing sectors only employ 25% of the labor force but contribute 75% of GDP. Kenya also exports textiles worth over 400 million under AGOA. Privatization of state corporations like the defunct Kenya Post and Telecommunications Company, which resulted in East Africa's most profitable company, has led to their revival because of massive private investment. As of May 2011, economic prospects are positive with 5% GDP growth expected, largely because of expansions in tourism, telecommunications, transport, construction, and a recovery in agriculture. The World Bank estimated growth of 4% in 2012. In March 1996, the presidents of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda re-established the East African Community. The EAC's objectives include harmonizing tariffs and customs regimes, free movement of people, and improving regional infrastructures. In March 2004, the three East African countries signed a customs union agreement. Kenya has a more developed financial services sector than its neighbors. The Nairobi Securities Exchange is ranked fourth in Africa in terms of market capitalization. The Kenyan banking system is supervised by the Central Bank of Kenya. As of late July 2004, the system consisted of 43 commercial banks and several non-bank financial institutions including mortgage companies, 4 savings and loan associations, and several core foreign exchange bureaus. Ethnic groups. Kenya has a diverse population that includes many of Africa's major ethnic, racial and linguistic groups. Although there is no official list of Kenyan ethnic groups, the number of ethnic categories and subcategories recorded in the country's census has changed significantly over time, expanding from 42 in 1969 to more than 120 in 2019. Most residents are Bantus or Nilotes. Cushitic groups also form a small ethnic minority, as do Arabs, Indians, and Europeans. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, in 2019, Kenya had a total population of 47,564,296. The largest native ethnic groups were the Kikuyu, Luhya, Kalenjin, Luo, Kamba, Somali, Kisii, Mijikenda, Meru, Maasai, and Turkana. The northeastern province of Kenya, formerly known as NFD, is predominantly inhabited by the indigenous ethnic Somalis. Foreign-rooted populations include Arabs, Asians, and Europeans. Languages. Kenya's ethnic groups typically speak their mother tongues within their own communities. The 2 official languages, English and Swahili, are used in varying degrees of fluency for communication with other populations. English is widely spoken in commerce, schooling, and government. Peri-urban and rural dwellers are less multilingual, with many in rural areas speaking only their native languages. British English is primarily used in Kenya. Additionally, a distinct local dialect, Kenyan English, is used by some communities and individuals in the country, and contains features unique to it that were derived from local Bantu languages such as Kiswahili and Kikuyu. 207 It has been developing since colonization and also contains certain elements of American English. Sheng is a Kiswahili-based cant spoken in some urban areas. Primarily a mixture of Swahili and English, it is an example of linguistic code switching. 69 languages are spoken in Kenya. Most belong to 2 broad language families, Niger-Congo Bantu branch and Nilo-Saharan Nilotic branch, spoken by the country's Bantu and Nilotic populations respectively. The Cushitic and Arab ethnic minorities speak languages belonging to the separate Afro-Asiatic family, with the Indian and European residents speaking languages from the Indo-European family. Religion. Most Kenyans are Christian, with 54% Protestant and 21% Roman Catholic. The Presbyterian Church of East Africa has 3 million followers in Kenya and surrounding countries. There are smaller conservative Reformed churches, the Africa Evangelical Presbyterian Church, the Independent Presbyterian Church in Kenya, and the Reformed Church of East Africa. Orthodox Christianity has 621,200 adherents. Kenya has by far the highest number of Quakers of any country in the world, with around 146,300. The only Jewish synagogue in the country is in Nairobi. Islam is the second largest religion, comprising 11% of the population. 60% of Kenyan Muslims live in the coastal region, comprising 50% of the total population there, while the upper part of Kenya's eastern region is home to 10% of the country's Muslims, where they are the majority religious group. 216 indigenous beliefs are practiced by 0.7% of the population, although many self-identifying Christians and Muslims maintain some traditional beliefs and customs. Non-religious Kenyans are 2% of the population. Some Hindus also live in Kenya. The numbers are estimated to be around 60,287, or 0.13% of the population. Culture. The culture of Kenya comprises multiple traditions. Kenya has no single prominent culture. It instead consists of the various cultures of the country's different communities. Notable populations include the Swahili on the coast, several other Bantu communities in the central and western regions, and Nilotic communities in the northwest. The Maasai culture is well known to tourism, despite constituting a relatively small part of Kenya's population. They are renowned for their elaborate upper body adornment and jewelry. Additionally, Kenya has an extensive music, television, and theater scene. Sports. Kenya is active in several sports, among them cricket, rallying, football, rugby, field hockey, and boxing. The country is known chiefly for its dominance in middle distance and long distance athletics, having consistently produced Olympic and Commonwealth Games champions in various distance events, especially in 800 m, 1500 m, 3000 m steeplechase, 5000 m, 10,000 m, and the marathon. Kenyan athletes, particularly Kalenjin, continue to dominate the world of distance running, although competition from Morocco and Ethiopia has reduced this supremacy. Some of Kenya's best-known athletes include the four-time women's Boston Marathon winner and two-time world champion Catherine Endiraba, 800-meter world record holder David Rudisha, former marathon world record holder Paul Turgat, and 5,000-meter Olympic gold medalist John Ngugi. Kenya's most decorated athlete is three-time Olympic gold medalist and 11-time world marathon major champion, Eliud Kipchoge. Kenya won several medals during the Beijing Olympics, 6 gold, 4 silver, and 4 bronze, making it Africa's most successful nation in the 2008 Olympics. New athletes gained attention, such as Pamela Gelamo, the women's 800-meter gold medalist who went on to win the IAAF Golden League jackpot, and Samuel Wanjiru, who won the men's marathon. Retired Olympic and Commonwealth Games champion Kipchoge Keino helped usher in Kenya's ongoing distance dynasty in the 1970s and was followed by Commonwealth champion Henry Rono's spectacular string of world record performances. Lately, there has been controversy in Kenyan athletics circles, with the defection of a number of Kenyan athletes to represent other countries, chiefly Bahrain and Qatar. The Kenyan Ministry of Sports has tried to stop the defections, but they have continued anyway, with Bernard Lagat being the latest, choosing to represent the United States. Most of these defections occur because of economic or financial factors. Decisions by the Kenyan government to tax athletes' earnings may also be a motivating factor. Some elite Kenyan runners who cannot qualify for their country's strong national team find it easier to qualify by running for other countries. Kenya has been a dominant force in women's volleyball within Africa, with both the clubs and the national team winning various continental championships in the past decade. The women's team has competed at the Olympics and World Championships, though without any notable success. Cricket is another popular sport, also ranking as the most successful team sport. Kenya has competed in the Cricket World Cup since 1996. They upset some of the world's best teams and reached the semi-finals of the 2003 tournament. They won the inaugural World Cricket League Division 1 hosted in Nairobi and participated in the World T20. They also participated in the ICC Cricket World Cup 2011. Their current captain is Rakep Patel. Rugby is increasing in popularity, especially with the annual Safari Sevens tournament. The Kenya Sevens team ranked 9th in the IRB Sevens World Series for the 2006 season. In 2016, the team beat Fiji at the Singapore Sevens finals, making Kenya the second African nation after South Africa to win a World Series championship. Kenya was once also a regional powerhouse in football. However, its dominance has been eroded by wrangles within the now defunct Kenya Football Federation, leading to a suspension by FIFA which was lifted in March 2007. In the motor rallying arena, Kenya is home to the world-famous Safari Rally, commonly acknowledged as one of the toughest rallies in the world. First held in 1953, it was a part of the World Rally Championship for many years until its exclusion after the 2002 event owing to financial difficulties. Some of the best rally drivers in the world have taken part in and won the rally, such as Bjorn Waldegaard, Hanu Mikkola, Tommy Mäkinen, Shekhar Mehta, Carlos Sainz, and Colin McRae. The Safari Rally returned to the World Championship in 2021, after the 2003 to 2019 events ran as part of the African Rally Championship. Nairobi has hosted several major continental sports events, including the FIBA Africa Championship 1993, where Kenya's national basketball team finished in the top 4, its best performance to date. Kenya also has its own ice hockey team, the Kenya Ice Lions. The team's home ground is the Solar Ice Rink at the Panari Sky Center in Nairobi, which is the first and largest ice rink in all of Africa. Kenya men's national field hockey team was considered one of the good teams in the world during 1960s and 1970s.